Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is Chad Cicconi, co-creator of Fracture. Chad, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thanks, great to be here.
So, why don't you just tell us a little bit about Fracture?
Fracture is a comic book produced by Action Lab Entertainment, and it started in 2011. It's a superhero book it's set in a superhero world, but it's kind of more a comedy than a straight superhero book. It's about a guy, our main character, slowly over the course of the first volume comes to learn that he has multiple personalities, one of which he learns is the city's greatest superhero. And over the course of the first volume, he also comes to learn that another one of his personalities is the city's most heinous supervillain who's plotting to kill the hero. So our main character, whose name is Jeff, has to kind of take control of the situation and figure out how to save himself from himself. And obviously mental illness is a very serious thing, but this is played more as a dark comedy than a real serious treatise on somebody with multiple personalities. But it's a fun book, and the characters, particularly the supervillain character, is really bombastic and over the top. And our main character, Jeff, who's not a superhero, trying to figure out what to do with these powers and how to extricate himself from this situation, gets into a lot of trouble.
It's interesting. I was able to read through the first book a little earlier, and the hero is Virtue or Valor?
The hero is Virtue.
Virtue, and the villain is Malice.
Correct.
So you have this obvious play on good and evil, and you've got the guy in the middle. It's almost like a fight club, which we can't talk about.
That's the first rule, yeah.
So when you were developing this concept, how did everything sort of come together for you?
Well, I worked with the writer, whose name is Sean Gabarine, who I had known. He and I are both from around Pittsburgh. I'm from near Pittsburgh. And I had been working on some other small independent books, and Sean and I had met at some local conventions, and I had talked to him, and he had a little company at the time, and he still does, which he was doing horror comic books, a company called Angry Gnome, that he and his wife run. And he had approached me at one of our conventions, and he was aware of my artwork, and he said, "I have an idea for a superhero dark comedy. Would you be interested in working on it with me?" And I was kind of coming to the end of a project at the time, and I said sure. And so he sent me some character concepts and ideas and some rough scripts, and we worked together on the design. I did a bunch of sketches for the Virtue character and the Malice character and the character of Virtue's wife, who's also a big character in the series, and we worked over the course of several months to design all the characters, and then he had scripts finished, and I started drawing the book.
So when you get the scripts, are you able to make changes, like let's say something on the typed page is different than how it would play on the drawn page? Are you able to make those changes, I guess, to make it a more collaborative process?
Yeah, Sean and I work pretty collaboratively. He did produce full scripts. There's different ways you can do it. You can do Marvel style, where you just kind of get an outline and the artist comes up with all the panels. But Sean did full scripts, but we would jump on Skype and talk about, well, I don't think this works. I have an idea for something else for the action on this page. And I would send him some sketches, and he was very open to collaboratively working like that. And so the scripts, most of them came through onto the page, but I was able to incorporate my own ideas as well.
I guess another follow-up on this would be taking a look at some of the panel layout that you have. You've got some pages where the panels are in a, let's say a more normal style 6-panel grid or something like that. But then you have some panels where they're sort of helter-skelter across the page. And I'm just wondering, is that something that was your input completely, or was that something where you were kind of working with the script as well?
Most of that was my design. Sean would occasionally put, this panel needs to be a bigger panel or almost a full page or a full page splash or whatever, but in terms of the particular layout, whether it's a grid or some angled or different polygons or overlapping, that was my design. And it was usually driven by what I thought was the best way to convey what was on the page. If there was a battle scene with chaotic action, I'll often skew the panels and make them different polygons, or sometimes have them look like they're kind of exploding off the side of the page. Normally, if it's just a talking head scene with two people in a diner talking, I won't go crazy with weird panel layouts on that page. But it's really what I try to judge as the best way to convey the story.
It was interesting too because you say convey the story. I felt that the panel arrangement that you chose in certain situations, I think there was one scene when he's sort of realizing that he's got this multiple personality situation. We kind of see the panels reflect his uneasiness and his confusion. And it's very effective to the audience because you read it in one way, but there's an impact on us as a viewer that comes from something that we just sort of feel. It's more visceral, I suppose.
Well, that's good to hear because that's the intent. There's a lot of ways as an artist, and I'm not as skilled as a lot of them, but I'm trying to improve in this area. There are ways other than just depicting the action of the scene, or ways you can depict the action of the scene, including panel layouts, to try to convey a mood. You can do it with light and shadow. You can do it with like the old Batman TV series used to do it, where they would tilt the camera and you would be seeing the scene at a weird angle, and that creates a mood, a psychological mood of sort of chaos and unease. So there's ways you can use as an artist to convey through the panel layouts and the way the characters are placed in the panel to try to convey the mood along with the word balloons and the actual what's going on in the panel. So you've correctly identified that in those places where our main character was uneasy or trying to figure things out or confused, I would often tilt the camera or make the panels less uniform to try to convey that mood.
It's interesting. The approach to storytelling is, I think, very effective to convey a lot of emotions. And one of the things I notice in your artwork is that your characters have very expressive faces. You kind of sense their moods. And again, I don't want to insult you by saying this. It's very Kevin Maguire-esque, the old JLA artist who's one of the masters of the craft. So I'm just wondering how you approach, creating characters with their own look, their own expressions, and the like.
Well, one of the hardest things for an artist, speaking on behalf of artists, is to get those facial expressions working correctly. And it's not an insult to be compared to Kevin Maguire, even just as being reminiscent of him. He is one of my heroes. And the character acting, because that's what we call it, we're making our characters act on the page, is, we'll do everything from looking for reference of facial expressions. I got books behind me on the shelf about, the structure of the face and how facial muscles work for various facial expressions. And I have a little mirror on my drawing table that, I'm looking in the mirror trying to make the face and show and capture what the character's face would be showing, because realistically, comics are a static 2D image trying to convey the information of a story involving people. So you're limited in how you can express that. So I've heard some artists describe it as, you're not depicting a movie, you're depicting a silent movie. Because if you look back at the silent movies, everybody's facial expressions were exaggerated, and it was, the woman swooning. You have to have your characters act in a very broad way to get the emotion across through the medium of a two-dimensional static image on a page. So I really do try to convey very broad facial expressions and character acting in my work. I don't always succeed, but I try.
There was actually, I think it was Scott McCloud in one of his books, he talked about body language, and it was one of those things that until you see it written out and kind of explained, you understand it, but you didn't understand it from a conscious level. And that's, I guess, one of the things you see a lot of younger artists, they will always just have someone pointing at something. Mm-hmm. And it seems that if you're able to convey that same sort of action, but with body language, it's a little bit more effective. So when you're creating this, you said you have the mirror on your drawing board and you've got the books and whatnot. Is it something where you sort of that Norman Rockwell thing where you kind of have to lean over and sketch it out?
No, I don't have a full-length mirror. I have a little, just a little like a makeup mirror or something that's 5 or 6 inches, just to sort of be able to hold up and mouth a word if a character is speaking a word. If you look at a lot of comics, the characters have word balloons, but their mouth is closed, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too. And the human mind will interpret that, and it's fine. A lot of artists do that, but oftentimes, if you have a character saying something very important and there's a key word, I'll try to form the mouth speaking that word. So, my mirror is used to see, okay, what's the mouth look like when I'm saying, or whatever the word is, or just a facial expression. And, I'll use my iPhone. A lot of times I use my iPhone if I'm trying to pose a hand, because I can't hold my hand there and draw it at the same time very effectively. So I'll pose my hand and then take a picture of it, and then draw from the photo or whatever I have at hand that I can use to model it, to try to make it look more believable.
Well, it's interesting. I've seen in television production technology changing over the last, just 5-10 years at this point, where you have, basically what used to be $100,000 worth of equipment that a reporter would go out with is now in somebody's, free cell phone. How has technology changed the way that you're creating art?
Well, I have my process. I started really in about 2007 trying to produce comic books. And even in that short time, my personal process of how I do a comic book page has evolved. And it's continuing to evolve. For Fracture, for books before Fracture, I did a fully traditional style, which means I had a piece of paper where I would do a little rough on it, and I might use a light board or a printout of that on a larger piece of paper to do my pencils, and then I would do the inks right on top of that. And for Fracture, I was using a hybrid process where I would do the pencils on an 11 by 17 piece of Bristol, and then I would scan those into the computer and clean them up and move them around or resize the characters if I felt like I needed to, or change the perspective in Photoshop, and then I would print that out as a blue line. And I don't know if any of your other guests have ever referenced a blue line. It's basically the pencils, which are kind of black and white or gray on a white piece of paper, printed out as non-photographic blue lines on a white piece of paper. And then I can use that as a guide to do my inks over top of the blue line. And then I would scan those inks, and in Photoshop it's very easy. You can drop out those blues just like, say, a green screen does, the same type of technology. You can select that blue color and drop that right out, and you have a pristine set of inks for the colorist to work digitally over top of. And then for books that I'm doing since Fracture, a book I'm working on right now, I'm doing everything digitally. I have a Wacom Cintiq tablet computer with a pen interface that I do my rough sketches right on there, and just put another digital layer on top and do my pencils, and throw another digital layer on top and do my inks right there, all in the same computer file.
So that's interesting. So it's basically an electronic drawing board, essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was telling you before we went on camera, it's on the fritz. It's at the company for a replacement. The power charger stopped working on it, so I can't show it to you. But it's literally a tablet computer with a pen interface that people have probably seen, but it has a high-end interface for the pen. It has 2,000 levels of pressure sensitivity and a very precise digitizer for accepting that pen input, optimized for an artist. There's a lot of things that you can use a pen input on, like an iPad, or a lot of the tablet computers now you could use a pen interface on a touch screen, but this company Wacom makes pretty high-end, optimized for artists pen displays. They've been doing it for years, and it's one of the standards for the digital artist, computer artist, or comic artist, or whomever who produces work that way. Most of them will use a Wacom tablet.
And pardon my ignorance, but is this something where if you're drawing on the tablet, you'll see the line as you make the motion,
Yeah.
or so you don't need to put a sheet of paper or anything there?
No, it's the older ones would be a interface where you would look up at your screen, but the tablet would be down here in your lap, and it would be like a mouse or something, and you could use a pen interface, but you would have to look not at your hand. The newer ones, I'm literally drawing right on a computer screen that's showing the line appearing under my pen. So it's like I'm drawing on a piece of paper.
but a little bit easier to erase, clean up,
Oh,
and
absolutely. Yeah,
organize.
the undo. I found now. I told you my machine's in the shop, and I'm doing some sketches and things this week while I'm waiting for it on paper, and I keep finding myself reaching for the undo button.
And you had a few sketches that we were looking at a little beforehand. Do you mind sharing a little bit
Sure.
of your work?
Yeah, these are just some things while I'm waiting on my the book I'm working on. I'm doing digitally, so while I'm waiting on my computer to be replaced, I can't really work on it. So I'm doing some concept sketches for a creator-owned concept I've had rattling around in my head for a couple of years that I may write myself. I haven't done this, but I'm just doing some sketches. It involves it's kind of Silence of the Lambs meets Tinkerbell, involving a sort of police procedural taking place in the fairy realm. So these are just some concept sketches. Here's one where the fairy's riding a hummingbird, herding some bees with a shipment of pixie dust. And then here's one of the main character. I was just working on some sketches, some design sketches, and these are just pencil on cardstock. But these are hybrid as well. I don't know how good my camera is, but these are pretty tight pencils over top of a blue line. So for these sketches, I did a preliminary sketch in my sketchbook, and then I scanned it and printed it out in blue line. And if you were here looking at these very closely, you could see a very faint blue line underneath the pencils. You might not be able to see that on the camera. But then I pencil tightly over top of those, and then I can scan them and drop out the blue lines.
Well, I've noticed that your style has evolved as you are going. And I'm just wondering how you view your artistic process from when you first started doing comics to now. I mean, everyone should hope to see progress moving forward. I'm just wondering if you're aware of the progress.
Well, I can't even look at the stuff I did in 2007. I don't even want to see it anymore, because my style and my skill level, I think, has improved since then. And what I'm producing now is very different. I mean, even the book you read, Fracture Issue 1, Volume 1, was produced in 2010. Fracture Volume 1 came out in 2011, and we've actually completed Volume 2. Both trades are being reissued by Action Lab in January. But Volume 1, the first issue I did in 2010. So my art style is a little bit different now than it was then. And really, I'm completely self-taught. I'm not, I never went to art school. So I'm a sucker to buy every art book I can find. I'm looking at tutorials online, and I'm trying to prove my character acting that you were talking about, my anatomy to make my characters look more believable, and my perspective and backgrounds to make, it ain't easy drawing a picture of a city below two characters flying from above in three-point perspective with traffic below and all sorts of buildings. Now, with the computer programs, there's a lot of aids you can get that help you get the lines in perspective correctly, but to learn the rules of perspective and to draw interiors, exteriors with believable backgrounds, that's one of my challenges. My backgrounds have improved a lot, I think, over the last 4 years, as well as my general character anatomy.
I guess with any art, you sort of notice the details and start to fixate on the little details to make everything appear more real in the world that you're creating, because essentially you're doing what an entire team of production professionals would do on a TV show or a film. There are hundreds of people who, their whole job is just to make a background look believable when the Avengers blow up Manhattan, and you get to do it all with a tablet and a stylus.
Well, that's the advantage that comics have over film media and always will. I've got an unlimited budget. I can blow up the earth anytime I want with my pencil and pen. I can design any spaceship and put it on the page that comes directly from my imagination to the page. I don't have to have 40 model workers or 3D image designers or animators to get that on the page. So comics have always had that advantage over the film industry.
Well, I'm going to switch gears slightly and get to the business end of comics. So you developed the idea of Fracture. You're working with your partner. How do you go from the drawing board essentially to being published?
Well, Fracture was a little bit different and unique in that right at the time Sean and I were developing Fracture, We also started having some discussions with some of our other friends who were creators about forming our own publishing company. And Fracture was the uh, the maiden title, if you will, for the new company we formed, Action Lab Entertainment. It's a creator-owned book, and right around that time, Sean Gabrin and I and myself and a couple of other folks that we knew, particularly Dave Dwanch, who is now the creative director of Action Lab, Sean Pryor, who was the head of a company, a small company called PKD Media, who I had done some books for before Fracture. We were at a convention down in North Carolina, the Heroes Convention. And after Sunday night, we were all sitting at the hotel bar, kind of commiserating about, well, I sold this many copies, and we're all doing the same thing here, and we're all selling 300 copies of our creator-owned books that we think are awesome. And it seems like we're just spinning our wheels, selling the same 300 copies to the same 300 people of all of our books. How do we break out of this and expand our audience? And so we kind of almost half jokingly looked at each other and said, well, what if we formed a company and I'll edit your book and you edit my book and I'll do the colors on your book? And the theory we had was that there's a level of professionalism that you can get when you're doing a book by yourself with one or two people that with others outside influences editing and helping you do the design work, you can reach a higher level of professionalism. So we were kind of half joking that night at the convention. And then within about a month of that, we decided, well, let's really do this. So we actually formed a little company, and we called it Action Lab Entertainment. We designed a logo, and since Sean and I were working on Fracture at the time, we said, well, we'll use this as our first book. And we did a Kickstarter campaign. I don't know if any of your other guests have talked about Kickstarter, but it's a crowdfunding. And, we asked for $3,000 for the printing cost for Fracture. And we successfully funded that. And that was our seed capital to start Action Lab. And Fracture was the first book we got into the national comic distribution system to be available in comic shops. And we've kept the ball rolling, and Action Lab's still operating 4+ almost 5 years later, and we're publishing boatloads of creator-owned titles now, and Fracture's kind of the beginning of it all.
Well, it's interesting. I had the opportunity to attend a panel at the NC Comic-Con just a few weeks back, and Action Lab has gone from being a small publisher to top 20.
Yeah.
Which is impressive, and it says something about the business model that you've been able to create, where you have creators working on what they choose to work on rather than, we've got to put out the latest episode of, Widget Man or something like that.
Right.
It wasn't really a question, more a statement, I guess.
It does, we think, give us a unique take on things. There's other creator-owned companies out there. The biggest one is probably Image Comics. Most of their comics, or all of their comics, as I understand it, are creator-owned, which is, as you point out, different from Marvel or DC, where the company owns the characters, the company owns the book, and you're an artist, you get paid a page rate, you work on Spider-Man, they give you the script, you draw the script, that's that, you go home, you don't own anything. Most of our books, we do have a couple of company-owned books at this time after 4 or 5 years in operation, but most of our books, the vast majority of our books at Action Lab are creator-owned, which means creators come to us and say, hey, I got this book, I want to publish it. And we look at it, and if we like it and want to work with them, we publish it, and we kind of front the printing costs, and then we split the profits with the creators. So it's a more direct way for people to get their own visions into print.
And you mentioned Kickstarter, which is an interesting idea, and you see this a lot with films and other projects, where people are, instead of going to the few production companies out there, they're going to the public that would be interested in seeing a film idea or a game or an invention that would make their lives easier or something like that. And
or
we see
a comic book.
Or comic books, absolutely. And we see that paradigm shift there, and I'm just wondering, as a successful Kickstarter, if you had any thoughts on where it's going to go next.
Well, I don't know what the ceiling is for Kickstarter, or whether there will become a point of sort of user fatigue with Kickstarter, but it still seems to be going strong. Ours for Fracture was done way close to the beginning of Kickstarter, before it was in anywhere near as common a use as it is now. it's a valid, tried and true method of raising funds now. At the time we did it, we were aware of one other comics creator who had done it. It had been used for other stuff, for video games and things like that, but there was only one other comics creator that we had heard of who had used it for a comic, a guy named Steve Bryant, for a book called Athena Voltaire. And we knew Steve, and we knew his book was good, and he had raised money for printing of his book, Athena Voltaire. So we said, let's try it. It was kind of an untested thing at the time in the comics industry. And in the years since, it has just grown by leaps and bounds, and there's pitfalls to doing it. There's a lot of work that we've heard horror stories of folks that hadn't anticipated things like postage and all the packing and boxing and all the time and effort it took to do the premiums and rewards and things, and fell on their face. But if you go into it understanding what's required, we know folks, good friends of ours, have used it, and Action Lab creators have used it more recently to fund their books in terms of a writer or an artist needing to have money to pay themselves while they finish the book, or a writer needing funds to pay an artist to finish a book. And Action Lab's published Kickstarter supported books. So it's a useful and valuable tool, I think, at this point. And like I said, I've got my eyes open to see whether it's going to tail off at some point, where people are going to kind of get sick of it, because there's a lot of folks now out there who are asking for money for various projects, and you have to be a lot more discerning now than 5 years ago when there were 4 projects. There's probably hundreds of comic book projects on Kickstarter right now.
We have about 1 minute left. It's amazing how quickly the time is flying. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, now that Action Lab is a big name publisher, for a lack of a better phrase, what your role is. I mean, I'm imagining there's a lot of business that goes into publishing comics, so I'm imagining that you're busy with that.
I'm very lucky in that one of the first decisions that I made, or first things I did to help Action Lab, was to bring a buddy of mine in who's a bit of an entrepreneur, and although a big comics fan, was not a comics creator. So one of my greatest contributions to Action Lab was understanding that us 4 or 5 comic books creators weren't going to have the business sense to make this thing fly unless we had an actual business person involved. So the guy that I brought in has been doing most of the heavy lifting and the day-to-day work, operating the company. He's currently our CEO. So my role really...
I'm being told, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chad, I'm being told that we are out of time.
Oh, okay.
And I do want to thank everyone for watching Comic Culture. We hope to see you again soon for an upcoming episode.